Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Community and Infrastructure Services Committee meeting for June 19th. I'll ask of Council to declare any pecuniary interest regarding matters listed on the agenda. And I see none. We have no consent items today. So we'll move to delegations. I would like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate removal from the meeting: interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, hate speech or defamatory comments. And please do not take offense if there are no questions from Council following your presentation. This is Council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. Staff, we can go to delegations. I believe we have one online.
Through the chair, you can start with the staff presentation and then we'll have the delegation go after this.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Mr. Hildebrand, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Johnston, and good afternoon to members of Council as well. Before I go through some of the key findings of this report, I just want to stress one very important point. The City of Kitchener, and indeed our whole community, is very fortunate to have a network of volunteer-run neighborhood associations who are interested and skilled in providing programming out of some of the city's community centres. Programming these centres requires a significant amount of effort and volunteer hours, and many of those associations are doing great work to help fill some of the city centres with programming. We are incredibly thankful to all of the volunteers who put in so many hours to provide vital programming to the residents of Kitchener. I also want to stress that we're very fortunate to have a team of dedicated and highly skilled municipal employees who work in the community centres and want to do more to activate their centres, but are constrained by the city's existing policies and procedures. The challenge before Council today is not with hardworking neighbourhood association volunteers nor the dedicated staff that work in the city's community centres. It's with the city's outdated community centre operating model that has not changed with the times, and it is not meeting the needs of all of Kitchener residents. The current operating model is based on two key city policies: the facility booking policy and our neighbourhood association affiliation policy, both of which were approved more than 20 years ago and have not substantially changed since that time, despite all the social and economic changes we've seen in our community. Along with these two key city policies, the community centre operating model relies heavily on neighbourhood association volunteers to do a significant amount of work to provide programming out of city-owned community centres, putting a burden of work on volunteers that is much greater than any other Canadian municipality of similar size. The downward trend in volunteerism we are seeing in our community and across Canada indicates that reliance on volunteers to program centres is no longer sustainable. And in fact, many neighbourhood associations shared that they are struggling to attract and retain volunteers. While this model may be the least expensive for the municipality, it's not the best model for meeting the needs of all residents in the community. It is fair to say that the current operating model is working well for some community centres. However, it is also leaving other centres underprogrammed and underutilized. When we look at all the programming happening in our centres, which includes those offered by the city and neighbourhood association, 55% of all programming is being offered out of just 4 of our 14 community centres. This means that residents living in our neighbourhoods close to one of those 4 community centres are being very well served by the current model. However, residents living near the other 10 centres are not. Another way to look at how our current operating model is doing is to consider the number of programs being offered at each centre based on the income levels of the surrounding neighbourhoods. As this slide illustrates, 68% of all programming is happening at the 7 community centers located in mid to high income neighborhoods, while only 32% of programs are being offered in the 7 centers located in neighborhoods within a median household income below the cities. In other words, residents living in neighborhoods with lower household incomes have less access to community center programming near their home than those living in neighborhoods with higher household incomes. In addition to looking at the number of programs being offered at our community centers, staff also looked at the types of programs being offered. Again, this analysis demonstrates the current operating model is not meeting the needs of residents. And let me explain. Back in March of 2022, the city partnered with Environics Research to conduct a statistically representative survey of Kitchener residents on a wide variety of municipal issues, including their priorities for recreation and leisure programming. The results demonstrated that residents prioritized recreation and leisure programs that target 3 key areas, which are shown on this slide. The top priority was mental health and well-being. The second priority was services for vulnerable populations. And the third priority was physical health and fitness. As this chart illustrates, residents' third priority of physical health and fitness is being covered very well under the current operating model. However, residents' first and second priorities for programming are not being adequately addressed, with only 5% of all programming targeting these 2 priority areas. In order to begin to modernize the city's current community center operating model, staff have put forward a series of recommendations which are summarized on this slide. This list of potential changes was created according to 3 main objectives included in the motion City Council passed unanimously on March 20th, 2023, and which focused on, first, strengthening and modernizing collaborative partnerships between the city and community partners. Second, increasing residents' usage of city-owned community centers. And third, diversifying programs and supports offered out of city-owned community centers. In drafting these recommendations, staff worked closely with the management team within the Neighborhood Programs and Services Division. In addition, affiliated neighborhood associations were surveyed to provide input on a number of these potential changes. All of the association responses we received were considered very carefully by staff, and several changes, additions, and deletions were made to our recommendations based on their input. Staff recognize that implementation of any of these ideas, if approved, will require some additional work by neighborhood associations. Staff are committed to support neighborhood associations in completing this work and heard from many of the neighborhood associations through the online survey that the changes should be phased in over time with plenty of staff support and transparent communication along the way. And staff agree. And with that, Madam Chair, staff are available for any questions from members of Council.
Thank you, Mr. Hildebrand. Actually, we're going to move to delegations first, and then we'll come back to questions. Thank you. Okay, are we ready? Please go ahead, Mr. Corriveau. You have 5 minutes.
Yes, I've been having some technical difficulties, so I'm on my cell phone, and I'm not sure if somebody tries to call me on the cell phone, if that cuts off the video, the Zoom meeting.
Well, we can hear you and see you.
That's good. Well, that's good, yeah. No, I was looking at the agenda, and I was expecting to go on as a delegation prior to Mr. Hildebrand, but I'm fine right now. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Yes, I went through most of the documentation, and there's no way in 5 minutes that I can give you all my comments and thoughts, but I will focus on a few things. First of all, I want the council to know that I have a career in recreation and sport. I was a municipal rec director for 6 years and 25 and counting years as a team leader for the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Recreation. I was also the chair of the Ontario Trillium Foundation Grant Committee and various other volunteer background. But what brings me here today, first I want you to understand for disclosure, I'm here representing myself today, not the Forest Heights Community Association Board as an entity. We haven't had a board meeting to discuss all this, so I'm here just representing myself. I started with the Forest Heights Community Association approximately 12 years ago. In the first 2 years, I was a rink attendant at the Forest Heights Community Center, as some of you might have done in your past experience, flooding the ice and getting it ready for kids for the winter. After that, I was recruited, and I'll say recruited, to be president of the Forest Heights Community Association, which I spent over 9 years as president. So right now, I'm the past president, and that brings me today to this situation, because I noticed by watching one of your meetings you were having with the affiliation approval, which customary was a very routine item on your agenda, that there was an amendment made to bring back the staff report from 3 or 4 years ago, which is really what has happened since the March meeting. So I was surprised that took place, and I decided I will speak up at this meeting, but I can only, because of time constraints, I will concentrate on just 4 of the recommendations. I won't go through all the document. Number 4 has to do with the booking policy, which was not really presented 3 or 4 years ago. It didn't get that far. This council put a stop to the affiliation report that came in from City Council. But the essence of this number 4 recommendation is to do away with the booking policy, that the city staff would have final decision-making authority in all allocation of space in the community center. In my years as president, the understanding was, and it was communicated to me very clearly, that the Forest Heights Community Association would have 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday to Friday, and 9 to 12 noon Saturday morning. That was allocated to the association to offer programs. What we did with that is we had first choice to identify the programs we wanted to run, and whatever time we weren't using, of course, we referred back to the city or other groups, and we did that in a timely fashion so that we never, within months of each session, we had our program in place. And to be honest, we never used all the time, and it's a good thing today that we're not, because there's just so much a volunteer organization can do. So I just wanted to explain that, and I want to connect it to recommendation number 9. Number 9 is really interesting. I totally support it. We had suggested a number of years ago that an MOU be developed between ourselves and the FHCC staff, and that didn't go anywhere at the time, but I see this as having the potential of a partnership agreement between the city staff and the neighborhood. I'll refer to it as a neighborhood association, although we're not, we're a community association.
Mr. Corriveau, I'm going to give you another minute because it took you a little while to get going, but we're already past 5 minutes at this point. Thank you.
So you don't want to hear any more I have to say, is that what you're saying?
No, I said we're already past that, so I'm giving you another minute.
Oh.
Thank you.
Okay, so, well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I understand you don't want to hear from me anymore, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Corriveau. That wasn't what I said, but thank you. Are there any questions We'll move on to questions for the delegate. Are there any questions for the delegate? Okay. Thank you very much for coming in today, Mr. Corriveau.
Yeah, well, I don't appreciate the way I was treated. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, we will now move on to questions of staff. Councillor Chapman.
It's working. Yeah, thank you. So my first question has to, or I don't know if they're questions or, okay, question. When it comes to, and I don't know the slide number, but you talked about 3 different areas that, where focus is put. So including mental health and well-being, services for vulnerable populations, physical health and fitness. And the physical health and fitness was, substantially higher than the other 2. But is there not substantial overlap between physical health and fitness and mental health and well-being?
Go
I'm
ahead,
just
Mr.
wondering why we're
Hildebrand, and just
separating
leave
it out.
your
Sorry.
mic on. Request it again, and then there you go. And just leave it on. Thanks.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yes, physical health and fitness do have benefits to mental health and well-being, but when we talk about mental health and well-being, in this sense, we're talking more about mindfulness type of programs like meditation, and we're also talking about youth. There might be some youth programming, youth initiatives, that type of programming. So it goes beyond the recreation, and it takes it out of that realm into something more targeted, more specific. We'd likely be doing that with, if we're not doing it with our own staff, with outside partners who have expertise in that area.
Okay, thank you. My second question has to do with the, you again, I don't know what slide number it was, but it had to do with the different community centres themselves, and I know you had a couple, maybe that we can stop there. What would be useful for me is if, and maybe you could bring this back to council, is more information about, the different sizes of these community centres, how much of it is being programmed, and because they're all different, right? So Stanley Park is much bigger than Mill Courtland, for example. So if we had that information, it would give us a better sense of what we're actually looking at here, if that's possible.
That is possible.
So maybe the number of programs that are run, the uptake on those programs, just to, I worry about one size fits all, but I'll speak to that in a minute with my comments. So,
Thanks,
thank you.
Councillor Chapman. Mr. May?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Certainly we can provide to Council the overall square footage. The number of programs per community centre is already in the report before you. So I can get you the page reference and so that you can refer to that. I think what you're going to find when we send you the square footage, and let's be clear that this is not an exact science, but what you're going to find is that the smaller square footage community centres are in lower to mid-income neighbourhoods. And so that is once again, one of these inequities that's been created through the current system, but we'll send that in advance of Council's final deliberations.
And more than square footage, I guess I was thinking more about spaces. Like, is there a gymnasium? Is there, how many classrooms are there? Is there a kitchen? Just sort of the number of usable spaces. So not necessarily square footage.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, then what we can provide you, a number of years ago, I think just before COVID, we did a very detailed analysis of the amount of space being done in every community centre. And what we found across the board is that there is a lot of unused space in our community centres. But we'll recirculate that staff report.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Owodani.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So just a few questions. How do we currently, well, not we, how do the neighborhood associations currently create their programming? Is it based on maybe needs of community that gets to them, or is it something that the board of the associations just create from their end?
Through the chair, it's not a one-size-fits-all. In some instances, Some neighborhood associations will program for what they're interested in. There are other neighborhood associations who do a more complete needs assessment or needs of the community, and they develop programs based on needs coming into the community. Some recognize there's programs that they can't provide, and so they work with city staff, and we either work with a third party to come in and provide programming alongside the neighborhood association programming, or we might bring in programming from programs and resource services. The city staff would bring in programming and support the community needs.
Okay. Also, do the board members of the neighborhood associations currently get any information on the demographic that they're serving within their community? Is that something that they get on a regular basis? What's the cadence around something like that as well?
Through the chair, yes, we have provided demographic information of the surrounding neighborhood for neighborhood associations in order for them to, and city staff to figure out who's in their neighborhood and what the needs are, and help with what the needs are.
How often do we provide that for them?
Yeah, this is, through the chair, this is based on census data, so when the new census data comes out, we would update, and actually we give a geographical map of what's going on in their neighborhood.
Okay. I'll cue back in for comments.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Owodani. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I have got two amendments I'd like to propose, and I have discussed these with staff, and I believe I've provided this to clerks so they can bring them up on the screen. But the first is that starting in the fall of 2023, the city's leisure access fee assistance program be expanded to cover programs offered by all neighborhood associations at city-owned community centers, and staff be directed to build the financial impact of that program expansion into the 2024 operating budget, and that starting in the fall of 2023, the city fund the cost of residents utilizing its inclusion support worker program when participating in programs offered by a neighborhood association at a city-owned community center, and staff also be directed to build the financial impact of this change into the 2024 operating budget.
Okay, Councillor Schneider, do you want to read your other one at this time too, or was that both of them?
Oh, no, those are the two that I'm bringing forth.
Okay,
So, yeah.
all right, we will come back to you first then to deal with those. Thank you. Oops. Next up is Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. I want to thank staff for this great report. There's a lot of good things happening with this, and I think that some of these things are long overdue. I had a late letter from the Doon Pioneer Park Community Neighborhood Association, and they have some concerns, and I'm wondering if staff would be able to meet with them and myself before council next Monday.
Through the chair, for sure, we'd be able to. We'll be flexible to try to meet with them.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you, Councillor Michaud. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a broad overview of questions related to kind of the neighborhood association and the affiliation agreement outside of the associations that may be serving in community centers. This is something that we've touched on in the past, addressing a level of inequity of resources available to neighborhood associations that don't necessarily have the full resource of a community center and the space that's within that community center. I see that, I think, positive direction going forward where there's more level of accountability from the associations that can generate a level of income and a reserve. Is there an avenue either through this process or perhaps this is a future work, and I really see this as a step one. I don't think this is the entirety of this. It should be looked at as complete and we have a perfect model. Would we look at opportunities to include them into the fold of allowing programming where it's available for them to program, where times are available, and more importantly, funding kind of funneled back, funnel's not a good word, funding directed back to associations that can do more programming even outside the community center?
Through you, Madam Chair. First of all, I 100% agree with you that this is likely the first of multiple transformations that are going to be required within the community center operating model. It's 30 years old. It never should have gotten to a point where it wasn't revised before now, but we are where we are. Definitely what you're suggesting is something that is made easier through the changes being recommended to you today. And so I would say that we are aligned in terms of getting a greater variety of groups to provide programs in community centers where there is space available, and what we know is many of our community centers have space available.
Okay, so how can this council or committee have confidence to ensure that we will be revisiting this in a certain span of time? So is it a year, 2 years, or at the very least there may be some amendments to this a year from now once we adopt this new process?
Yes, so through you, Madam Chair, I am aware that another member of council is going to be moving an amendment that would require the city to review both of the main policies on a 5-year basis. I think that that is a reasonable time frame for the policy changes. As I said, I do believe that we will be coming back before that time with recommendations on other changes. As an example, back in 2019, City Council approved the creation of something that's unofficially now known as the Growing Neighborhoods Fund, and I think it was $50,000 every year, and that money was to go to neighborhood associations who don't generate revenue through programming on their own, so those neighborhood associations that have less funding, and that's been happening. But I do believe sometime next year we're going to have to bring a report back on that to tell you how things are going and where it can be improved and potentially grown. So I think this will be coming, there'll be many reports between now and the 5-year review.
Okay, I'm going to reserve my comment or question of the 5-year review. I think there may be some slight change to that I would encourage. But beyond that, Mr. May, you and I had a brief discussion about associations, again, outside of community centers where they're having to book space on their own accord, typically through the school board and their space. And a lot of times they have to pay for upfront and then it's reimbursement. You said, I'm just trying to get you on the record more than anything. I know that you will look into it, but ensuring that it can go back to these associations and say, hey, your concerns were heard. Would we be looking at simplifying that process?
I can absolutely assure you that I've already spoken to management staff on this issue. I can't guarantee a solution today, but I can guarantee you that it's on our radar and we are looking into it.
Okay, the final thing is in number 10, where there is I think an important change which we have not had of a level of accountability of some of the associations that do have substantive amount of reserve, and they need to outline exactly what their intentions are with these reserves. One of the things that perhaps may be advisable, and Mr. May, you did help me recommending this as well, is in B especially, and is satisfactory to the city. So it's not enough that they're just providing a outline, but that outline needs to be in the satisfactory conformity of what our policies and what our effort for that neighborhood may be. You would be agreeable with that?
Absolutely. We'd have to put a process in place to understand what would and would not be satisfactory, but I think that's where it could be done.
Okay, so Madam Chair, just as an amendment, because it's a line only, just the addition to 10.B is satisfactory to the city. And is satisfactory to the city.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Singh. Should we deal with that whenever we deal with the rest of the amendments, Ms. Saunderson, or?
Because you have other questions, so that would probably need to come back.
Okay.
The motions when you're taking all the amendments.
Okay, all right. We'll come back to you then. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Councillor Singh. Mayor Verbanabek.
Well, thank you very much, and I too want to thank staff for the work that went into this report. I think it highlights some really great news in terms of the history of our neighborhood associations and our community centers, which are an incredible asset in our community. But it also identifies some holes and some things that we need to, quite frankly, do better at in terms of serving the full breadth of our community and our neighborhoods as it exists today. I guess a couple questions that I have, and if we go back to that chart that shows the percentages and so on, if that can easily be put back up. And I don't know if this is a question for Mr. Mayor, Mr. Hildebrand, not this one, I think there was another one that followed. Yeah, no, go back, I think it was that one. If we look at, there was a question around the size of community centers and how that related to programming and so on. I think what would be interesting if we look at that broken down into more detail, well, there's no question that there's a heavier, there's much more programming at our centers where the medium income is higher, and some of those centers also tend to be bigger, but I think the catchment area of some of those centers also tends to be bigger. So I think that needs to be somehow factored into that analysis as we go forward. Is that something that staff could take a look at in the future in terms of just providing that additional information? I.e., what I'm saying is there's a center that may have a catchment area of 10,000 residents and it's smaller versus a center that has a catchment area of 50,000 residents and therefore it needs to be bigger simply by virtue of the numbers of people it's serving.
Through you, Madam Chair, that analysis has already been completed. It's in Appendix A. I recognize, Council, that there's a lot of data in this report.
Okay.
I wonder if Ms. Morlag-Silk could just hit on the ratios of number of people in the catchment area per number of programs.
Okay. That's fine. If it's already there and I missed it, I'll certainly go back and look at it. My other question, though, is as we look at this, my sense is that many other municipalities have made this shift some time ago. And, you know, we've been blessed and fortunate to be able to count on our volunteer groups to lead many of these programs, but it has been onerous, and as we know, some centers, and in particular some neighborhood associations, you know, quite frankly, are struggling right now. And so do we have any sense in terms of how we're comparing in regards to other municipalities in this respect? Because my sense is this is a point of catch-up that really is critical as we look at the ongoing sustainability of our community center model.
Through the chair, you're exactly right. There aren't a lot of municipalities that follow the same model as the City of Kitchener, and depending so much on our neighborhood associations to provide programming. And to be quite frank about it, we've worn that as a badge of honor at the City of Kitchener. We're very proud of that. We've been very proud of that. There are community or other municipalities with neighborhood associations. However, the reliance of the neighborhood associations to provide so much programming is not the case. And in fact, the municipalities, for the most part, take on that responsibility themselves with their staff. Usually, anecdotally, my understanding is most are doing events in their neighborhoods and they're being supported by staff, but not actual programming that is going on in the Four Seasons like we're doing here at the City of Kitchener.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Yeah, so just a couple questions. Like this is a great report. My first question is, again, there's a huge discrepancy between the top of the list here in terms of programming and, frankly, the bottom half of the list. And just to preface the question, in consultation with the head of the Standing Park Community Association, who's knocking out of the park in this respect, just want to make sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So that's the preface for some of these questions. So some of the concerns that they raised was, it's very clear the city has in this a final say. I understand someone has to have a final say in terms of the absolute programming. But just for the record, how does staff see that affecting the centers close to the top of this list in terms of programming?
Through the chair, so just to be clear, the use of space policy already states that the city staff have final say with regards to space allocation at our community centers, which makes sense because it's a city asset. So that isn't changing. What we're doing is we're providing clarity in most instances, and only one, and there's one change in wording. Now, in the instances, I don't see with like the Stanley Parks and the other neighborhood associations that the way we're doing business now would change significantly. In fact, like you said, to Stanley Park's knocking it out of the park. They're providing a good scope of programming to the community, meeting community needs. They're doing a good job, and they're doing that in collaboration with the city. So we'll continue along the same way.
Okay, so it's safe to say then that you don't anticipate removing any significant amounts of their programming, replacing it with city programming, for example?
No, that's not the intent.
And on that as well, one of the questions they asked, and again, this is probably more specific to the Stanley Park Community Association, my understanding is they've been nimble in response to better EDI programming. Would the city, when we're going through this process and we're noticing gaps, would the city's standard practice be to ask the associations if they'd be interested in offering that programming before we would engage in it?
Sorry, I missed the last part of your question.
Sorry, would we basically offer the association the first, like let's say we want to introduce a new program welcoming new Canadians. Would we offer that opportunity to run that program to the association before we would do it internally?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Stanley Park may be ready and have an expertise to provide that programming. Another neighborhood association may be non-existent. Or another association may have demonstrated no ability or interest in providing that program. And so it is a collaborative approach. I would say about Stanley Park that I echo your comments and Mr. Hildebrandt's comments. They're knocking it out of the park. And we have achieved that success through collaboration, and nothing in this report suggests that that collaboration will stop.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so and again, I was speaking specifically to the ones that would be able to provide that programming.
Through you, Madam Chair, what I would say, and I've only touched the surface of fully understanding this, but if we want to get serious about providing programs that address things like mental health and supports for vulnerable populations, there is an expertise and a lived experience that is required in order to provide that programming effectively. And there are organizations out there that are already doing it. And so our best bet is to go get those organizations and bring them into our centers.
Okay, that's certainly helpful. On that, and sort of just on that same tone, sort of anticipated the question from Councillor Chapman's question in the overlap. Part of my concern too is I guess I would hate to see a reduction of physical recreation type programming as long as I see empty spaces and office space, that sort of thing, or sorry, meeting room spaces throughout the city. So I'm assuming through this process, staff will be looking to backfill those initially.
Through you, Madam Chair, staff are going to be focusing on the centers where there is a significant excess of space already available, and we'll be ramping up the programming. Interestingly enough, those centers are in low to mid-income neighborhoods where they need the supports more than anyone. And so, yes, we are not going to be focusing our first priority on Stanley Park. They're already doing good work. We're going to be looking at those other centers where space is available.
Excellent. I'm noticing my time's up. I will cue back in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. And this would be a good time for me to mention that we did have a written submission from Chris Letizzi from the Stanley Park Neighborhood Association. And I apologize, I should have mentioned that earlier, so thank you. Okay, next up is Councillor Clancy.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that this is a significant body of work and a huge undertaking. So thank you very much to our staff. It's very detailed. I love the data that's driving this and the real lens of trying to ensure that all in the city of Kitchener have access to well-being. Just one quick question. Bright Up is in my ward. Can you? I don't see it here, but I know there's a reason. No one forgets Bright Up.
Through the chair, yeah, it is a little bit of an oddity. Bright Up Center is, although we do support a neighborhood association out of Bright Up Center, largely that facility is an aquatics facility and also provides most of the city's direct programming that's not senior programming. So there's the space dedicated there is for direct programs, and typically the neighborhood association sticks with providing special event programming, things like that.
Okay. And do you anticipate then that our staffing will shift to provide direct programming in the underserviced community centers? Is that kind of the direction you foresee?
Through you, Chair Johnston, we certainly are looking to provide direct programming in the spaces that need it, but we're also looking at partner programming as well, and also we don't forget that resident involvement is still important. So we continue to look at resident involvement as well as direct programming as well as third-party programming.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could just add and remind Council that through the last budget process, you actually approved the creation of 2 FTEs for programming. And so those are the individuals and positions already approved and in budget that will target some of those community centers.
Awesome. The only other, I guess I have a comment. I'll leave that for now. But yeah, just looking at, I guess, maybe how do we reflect on the financial inequity? Even like maybe one question, how does a neighborhood association generate funds outside of ActiveNet? I noticed a comment to that, and we're trying to compare very different dynamics and very different centers, and dollars seems to be a key focus for this, and that's a big, huge disparity, and maybe you can just speak to how do we reconcile that? And
Sure. So the ActiveNet provides is a registration for programming. So that's that it's very it provides just that type of activity for registration of programs. Outside of programming, neighborhood associations provide special events, and so there can be revenue generated from that. And also, it doesn't always capture drop-in programs, and so there's drop-in programs that are also provided at our facilities from neighborhood associations that might have a cost associated with it. So it's these types of programming that doesn't fit into the modules of ActiveNet that also are also being run.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Chapman, I'll go to you. Is it questions or are you on comments now? Who's still on questions? Okay, Councillor Obadani, I'll go to you.
Okay, just a question, but I'll cue back in later on for my comment. If a neighborhood association hires an individual, are they responsible for paying that individual, or is that something that the city supports them with?
Through the chair, the neighborhood associations hire their own instructors and they pay their own instructors.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll cue back in for comments.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Singh, Davey, and Deneau. Anyone else still have questions? Oh, Councillor Deneau, you have not asked your questions yet. Okay, I'll go to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks again for the report. You know, being that Kingsdale is in my ward, you know, and this is nothing new. We've had conversations that, you know, it is definitely an underutilized rec center in our community. And so my question is, how are we going to, or how is the city going to ascertain what programs are lacking in that community center going forward compared to what has been done in the past or what other community centers do?
Through the chair, if I understand the question, you're wondering how we're going to find out what the needs are and how we're going to program for the needs. Staff, through the chair, staff will do a bit of a needs assessment, and they will understand what the needs are.
as well as look at what's working well in similar communities across the city. And so we'll have a menu of programming through life, children and to older adults, and there will likely be some trial and error, but in the most part, the first thing is just to understand what the needs will be.
Okay. Is it possible to have a community engagement at Kingsdale? You know, invite some of the residents along Trainer or Vanier or wherever, and you know, have just a get together. Ask, what do you want? What do you need? What would you like to have?
Certainly. Community engagement will be part of the identifying the needs assessment. So not only residents, but also cultural groups in the area will be engaged, and we'll look to see what type of programming people are looking for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deneau. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, and thank you to staff for your report. I'm just wondering, considering that we have this chart on the screen right now, where do the associations? Why didn't we not include like the entire list and the list of defunct associations?
So, through you, Madam Chair, staff have gone to great lengths and many versions of this report to make sure that it remains focused on the operations of the community center. This is not a report focused on the health of our neighborhood associations. And that's important because, as Mr. Hildebrand said in the beginning, it is not the fault of neighborhood associations, it's the fault of a 30-year-old system. Having said that, we do have some of that information that we could provide to council in a confidential email if you think it's important before council ratification.
Well, I would think it's important because I think it gives a better picture to me on the inequity throughout it all, because I think I know dealing within my ward, I know the Boardwalk Neighborhood Association folded because they couldn't get space. So I think this doesn't tell the full story.
So through you, Madam Chair, yes, I believe there were 4 neighborhood associations that in recent years have folded. What we can provide to you is a full list of neighborhood associations and the programs that they've provided, as well as the revenue generated from those programs. What I would just remind Council of is that while our model expects neighborhood associations to do programming, they don't have to. And so many neighborhood associations, by choice or ability, are not providing any programming. So we'll provide you with that data, but you're going to see a lot of neighborhood associations that provide 0 programming. And that's because they're focused on other important, valuable things in the community.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ioannidis. Any other councillors with questions? Okay, Councillor Davey.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to touch upon some amendments now. First, just with respect to Councillor Schneider's amendments, they look great, but I just wanted to clarify 2 things. First of all, between the 2 of them, if staff has any estimate on the cost of those, and secondly, my understanding is they will be referred to, we might approve them today, but we're approving them to move into the budget, which will be subject to budget. So maybe that's a question to Councillor Schneider. I'm not sure.
So through you, Madam Chair, if I understand the amendments correctly, it would be to basically expand these 2 programs starting in the fall. So you would be basically pre-approving the funding to go into the budget. On an annual basis, we expect that both of these are $30,000 each, so a total of $60,000 would be pre-committed to the operating budget. I don't see any problems in building it in this year because it'll be minimal dollars. And given the size of our budget, I'm confident that staff can work in an additional $60,000 for these expansions.
Okay, yeah, I'm comfortable with that too. Thanks. One of the issues raised, and it's a bit of a sensitive one, was with respect to the difficulty in getting volunteers and having volunteers do basically fill out any work at all because they are volunteers, and that question is revolving around the EDI training. And I want to preface it too by saying I think this work is absolutely, we have to have our any board members, for example, undertake EDI training. The question is around the frequency of 2 years. And sorry, Madam Chair, but has someone moved or amended to look at this again every 4 or 5 years, something like that? Because I would recommend that we maybe look at it again at that point.
Yes, I will be moving that.
Okay, and would be every 5 years, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess my question, my intention would be then to really just amend Clause 5, Section B, to just say that, right now it just says, have neighborhood association board members participate in city organized and funded EDI training every 2 years. I would just X out the every 2 years at the end. So have them undertake the training, and then they could be reviewed, I think, in 5 years' time if it's required that it be bumped up in terms of frequency. Would staff have any concerns with that?
Through the chair, our belief is that we don't know what we don't know, and so 5 years might be quite a long time. What we might want to say is periodically, and then we can, it doesn't necessarily have to be 2 years. It could be if something substantial comes through where staff need training and our other groups need training, that time we would look at doing it. So it'd be specific on information that comes forward. So it doesn't hold us to doing something every 2 years. It's more looking at, okay, what are the needs? What are the needs in getting information out to our neighborhood associations? So if we change it from 2 years to periodically, then it would be flexible, and it could be as long as 5 years. It could be between that time as well.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that. So for the record, I will move that. And the last, actually, I'm going to move this in time for council, but just a heads up. I am going to include ActiveNet, so the registration software isn't explicitly listed as a benefit in this. I'm not going to, we've got a million amendments, Madam Chair, I'll save you the hassle, but I'll bring it in time for council to make sure that registration software is also included as a benefit. But on finally the last amendment, and sorry, Councillor Singh, I have to ask, because I know this is going to raise issues certainly with the SPCA. They're going to have difficulty saying that the investment policy is blanket subject to the city. So I guess I'm asking, like, is there specifics in terms of that we're looking at? Because I can pretty much guarantee if this comes through, you're going to have at least one community association coming forward having an issue with this amendment. So if you could clarify what you mean by subject to the city.
Councillor Singh?
Well, this is...
Oops, sorry.
No, it's okay. Just activate mine.
I'm trying to. Oh, there you are, turn off, okay. There.
Yes, Councillor Davey, it states more of it and is satisfactory, not subject to and is satisfactory to the city. I think it comes down to accountability. I mean, I appreciate you disagree. I think the more you're specific talking to association or community center in your ward that does really good programming. But at the end of the day, I think there needs to be a level of accountability. This is a city asset, city building. Any monies generated are at the behest of the community overall. And I think there needs to be that sense of accountability back to the overall community. And not really, the amendment here is not written in any explicit way. It's more really giving direction to staff to create that policy, right? And I think that's something that we would see later on. But it's giving, ensuring that there is a level of accountability back to the city of Kitchener as well, and not necessarily just framing what they intend to do with those monies.
Okay, but to clarify that, you said staff to create the policy, but the amendment, as you stated it, was the reinvestment policy is satisfactory to the city. So are you asking staff to go and do work and come back on that, or are you asking them to implement it now as of this document?
So I guess I would look to staff of how they would want to draft that policy, which would be the reference point that would ensure that there is, I guess, agreement on what that satisfaction is between the city of Kitchener through the affiliation agreement and, of course, the neighbor association as well. But Mr. May might be able to elaborate further.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, this recommendation is directing staff to amend the neighborhood affiliation policy, which means that at a later date, I believe this year, we intend to come back with a new policy for council to consider. What I take from Councillor Singh's amendment is we would write some language into that draft to address the issue he's raised. At that time, you can choose to include it or not include it, but this would simply be direction to include it in the policy that we'll be bringing forward.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I had keyed back in for question. Are the others ahead of me, or can I?
You still have another question, Councillor Singh?
Yes, I had keyed
Okay.
back in for additional questions. So
Okay,
this was
go
more
ahead.
to elaborate on my amendment to Councillor Davey. So Councillor Davey did actually raise a really good point about the EDI work, and I guess the requirement that the retraining would have to happen every 2 years. And my concern was also the same, that it could be onerous on volunteers, really. Now, one of the amendments I may be making is to Councillor Johnston of this to be looked at after 5 years. I was going to encourage after 2 years, at least for the first time, and they could be 5 years thereafter. My rationale for that was particularly for the committee, and then you can answer on it, on your, what you think of that, is that I would really like some sense of ownership by this term of council, by this council. That the fact that, you know, we made substantive changes that we can be comfortable with, and after 2 years we can get a sense of how these changes are evolving, and at the same time if additional changes need to be made, and thereafter it can be every 5 years. Would staff have a concern with that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I'm pausing because of the significant amount of work we've just undertaken to complete this review, and maybe the fact that I'm tired from doing it. But I do believe that by the end of this term, we could come back with some analysis of program stats and a comparison to what we've provided to you today. I don't believe the report or recommendations would be as robust, but it would give you an opportunity to look at the two. I am concerned that 2 years is not enough time. So first of all, these policies aren't going to change until the end of this year. So no changes are going to happen until the end of this year. Then we're going to need time to go out and find partners to bring into these centers that have space. Then they will have to identify programming needs, and then the programming will begin. And so I'm just a bit concerned that that data will not reflect what you're hoping for, given the lag time for this work.
But understanding the interest I was leading towards with the end of this term of council, would that be adequate time, at the very least?
I think if you can just leave it open-ended in terms of what you're looking for, to give staff the latitude to figure out at that time and place what report we can bring back that is data-based the way we brought it back to you today, I think that's fair.
So just asking for an update on the policy and the changes thereof before the end of this term of council would be adequate?
I think that's doable.
Okay, so it's the update on the policy then. That would be my amendment to your 5 years.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Singh. When I bring that forward, we will add in this conversation then with it as well.
But with that being said, just as a clarity, so Councillor Davey, are you making that change? Are you eliminating the word every 2 years, or periodically? Okay, okay.
Thanks, Councillor Singh. Okay. Okay, we'll move on to comments now. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. So first, I do want to thank staff for this report. I think it's, I understand where you're going with it. And, you know, as a former president of a neighborhood association, you know, the work that volunteers put in is so important. And I don't ever want to think that people feel that the hours and the efforts they put in are being undermined by other service providers or by us or the city staff. So I just think we always have to be cognizant of that, and I think you are, the way you presented this, right? But I just hope that we can continue along that path. I also wanted to make note of the staff and council being invited to board meetings. So when I was president, that was just standard procedure, but I noticed that sort of hasn't continued. And not to say that staff or the councillor have to be at every meeting, but certainly that invitation be there. I think that's also important to show the support, right, to the neighborhood associations when they want it, because they may not always want it. I just wanted to throw out an amendment to items 1 and 2. So for the neighborhood associations that don't have community centers, they're excluded from this Lead Your Access card and from the support worker component of the report. And I wonder if we could just take out, and I know that at a city-owned facility appears throughout the document, but on those two items in particular, would it be possible to remove the requirement that it only relates to programs provided at the city-owned facility? So if you do a program at the local church or at the local school or maybe out in the field, that if there was need for a support worker or for Lead Your Access card, that they could also tap into that.
Through the chair, I believe that that we could probably look at that and include that as well.
Okay, so it's either include or take out that particular at a city-owned facility, right?
Yes.
So yeah, that'd be great.
I think, yeah, some way to include that those providing programming, neighborhood associations providing programming, get the same supports.
Right, even if they're not at a city. Yeah. Okay, great. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, Mr. May, I'm coming to you. Sorry. And actually, before I go to Mr. May, can I ask that, we've had a lot of amendments. Can councillors all write them down and send them to the clerk, please, so that we're clear about what we're going to be going through? Go ahead, Mr. May.
Through you, Madam Chair, also I would ask Councillor Chapman to do is hold off on that amendment until council next Monday. We have no sense of the scale or size. I also believe that in order to do it, they would have to be run through ActiveNet, which may become more of a headache than it's work for the neighborhood associations. So if you would, give us some time, we'll go back, we'll look at it, and when I provide some of the other information that's been asked for, we can provide an update to you. And then you can decide next Monday if you want to move that motion or not.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Obadani, is it a comment, an amendment, both? Okay, get ready to write it down. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking at recommendation 10B. Establish and publish online a reinvestment policy that would outline how associations will reinvest revenues generated through programming. So my concern is, should it be revenue or should it be profit? And here's why I'm saying that. So my amendment, what I'm proposing is the word is changed from revenue to profit. If an organization or if a neighborhood association, let's say, made $50,000, but their expense because they have staff members who I didn't know they end up paying, you know, everything their expenses totals about $60,000, and now you're looking at negative $10,000 in terms of your nets. But we're saying they have to give a percentage of their revenue when you're already in the negative. So I'm just thinking, should that be, okay, if you are profiting, then a percentage of your profit should be part of this rather than your revenue. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, Mark, but I would want to get thoughts first before I proceed with the amendment.
Actually, I think Mr. May would like to answer that.
Through you, Madam Chair, there is a distinction. I'm quite happy with either word, so if that's an amendment you would want to make, we can make that work as well.
I would like to go ahead with the amendment. So should I email that over to
Yes.
Dana? Sure.
Yeah. And I have a number of councillors on the list here. Who else has an amendment? Put up your hand. Anyone else? That you have not already stated? Yeah, okay. All right, if you could please be sending those to the clerks then, that would be great. Okay. Councillor Clancy.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise a thought when we're looking forward into programming, especially related to mental health and vulnerable people, communities. I'm in close contact with a variety of organizations that serve equity-deserving people, and the feedback I'm getting from them is that they've never been so stressed financially than they already are. Like, we're talking, I know Compass has expressed that the needs are so great and the funding has only dwindled. KW Accessibility has expressed the concern about decreasing amounts of space that they have, decreasing funding, increased needs. So I guess one thing I hope that you'll take ahead is I find when we want groups that do this kind of work to contribute, they're already under a lot of pressure, and I hope that request will come alongside with funding opportunities to value the service that they're providing for our community. Yeah, that's one hope that I have, is that we recognize in not-for-profit sectors the pressure and the difficulties they're having to pay for their staff and provide their services, and the needs, how much the needs have grown. Do you have any thoughts, Mr. Hildebrand?
Sure, through the chair. Typically, we work in partnership with the group. When we approach a group, we'll work in partnership and see who can bring what to the table. So it's an ongoing discussion about who can provide what. For instance, in the instance of the group that we met with, who was that? That was
KWA.
KWA. In that respect, we're looking at, they're interested in very certain types of programming, and we had our programming staff there, and they're interested in talking with them about how we can provide our programming so we can leverage our staff and our programs to provide what they need. So we look at different things like that. It's not always just saying, okay, here you go, here's the space, and we'll leave you to it. We have more deep dialogue and what's going to happen. So in other instances, we look for funding elsewhere if we need to do something jointly. And sometimes when you're in partnership, you leverage each other and you're much more successful. So those are the things we try to do with these third-party partners when we're trying to solve a problem.
Thank you. I like that idea of looking for opportunities for joint funding. I know the Y just got money to do mental health services, right? And so we can look at partnerships between our city facility and our partners that do this good work with lived experience, and how we can make sure that we can put wind in everybody's sails. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clancy. Councillor Singh for comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A lot can be said about this, because I think this is a long time coming, and I think there's a lot of changes that are required. Not changes because the system is broken, but changes because the system can be better. This report should not be looked at as a critical format by anyone. It should be looked at as a best interest policy framework to make our communities stronger, to make them more vibrant. Just because something has been done in a certain way isn't necessarily what's required in that community now. But again, shouldn't be broken either, but perhaps it can be enhanced. And that's what I see that this committee and future council or respective council would be supporting, that change in that method. What really stuck in my mind out of this report, and I think Councillor Chapman asked this question, I think Mayor Benovich raised this too, what's a capture area? So it's rightly so if they're providing so much programming, because they represent or provide service to a larger capture area. Centerville, Chicopee, Chandler, Mohawk, Kingsdale serves 37,000 residents. They provide 7% of the programming. Stanley Park provides 35,000 or represents 35,000 residents and provides 31% of the programming. Does that mean that Stanley Park should start doing less? Absolutely not. Please do more. They should continue doing 31%, if not more. I think what we need to do is not look at it as a 100% pie. It should be as big as that pie can be, which means that every association or every community center should be doing 100% of the capacity that's enabled through the space that's available. And how do we support them? How do we strengthen them? And that's how I see these changes. And I'll just quickly say, because I don't want to be contradictory to what Councillor Davey is saying, I agree. I don't think we need to be in conflict with what the association might want to do in their community, how they want to reinvest. But again, it's important to have some sense of accountability. It's important to ensure that it's not necessarily, the viewpoints of those that serve on the board of what they think is what's best in the community, but it's in cooperation and collaboration with the city that can seek out wider and diverse voices. So those can be brought to the table as well, and then we have consensus. It's how do we build consensus? I think that's why there needs to be some greater sense of accountability. Thank you, Madam Chair. And if has the motion been already moved?
We need to have it moved.
Yeah,
So
I'll
we'd
move
like
it
to
with
do
the amendments that I would be bringing forward as well. And I've sent them to the clerk. Thank you.
that. Okay, thanks, Councillor Singh. And if I can just remind everybody to be sending in your amendments, please, to the clerk. Thank you. And also, we're behind time now, so if we can tighten up our comments, please. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I first want to begin by thanking each and every member of our neighborhood associations across the city for the incredible work, the dedication, the time, the passion that they put in to give to their community. When I was first elected, one of the first joys was attending the neighborhood association meetings at Centerville, Chicopee, and Stanley Park, and just seeing the pure commitment of these volunteers to their community and to making it better. And it's because of that commitment that I feel so strongly about this, what's going on here. It's very clear that staff have worked very hard along with the neighborhood associations to find out how we can support the great work they do. This isn't about taking anything away. It's about supporting and helping neighborhood associations meet needs in their neighborhoods. So this is just a great body of work. It's taken a lot of time and energy from both our staff and the neighborhood associations. And I think we've come up with something that's much needed and will be very helpful moving forward. And I'm very, very happy and thankful to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Schneider. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I think a lot of the comments that have been made so far, I wholeheartedly agree. I don't think any of the neighborhood associations are not doing what's within the purview of what we've been doing for the last 30 years. But what I do see here, and I know this has been something that's been, mentioned many times over the years, that we've had a really good system in place, but our system hasn't grown with the community, hasn't changed with the community. And when I look at the statistics in this report, it's really sad to me to see how inequitable it is throughout our entire community. And I experienced it in my own ward when the Boardwalk Neighborhood Association decided to shut it down. And I think I've been a big proponent around here I've always equated to doing stuff like something like the salary cap like they do in pro sports. But the real thing that points to here is the inequity. And I'm glad we're looking at this. I appreciate the work that staff has done. This is some really great work. And I do look forward to seeing this move through. And with all the amendments, I'm pretty sure, I think I support all of them. I don't think there's any in there that, to me, would raise any concerns. But we need to get moving and spread more equity within our community, because it's, again, we are also a changing demographic as a community as well. So I think it's important we get to this sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis. Mayor Urbanovic.
Well, thank you very much. And wondering if we could see the full list of amendments before I make my comments.
Oh,
Thanks.
wonderful. Thank you so much. And we have a name next to them, all of them, right?
Through the chair, the clauses without amendments currently are 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 11, and 12. So that leaves the balance of the recommendations. Councillor Johnson, you had noted previously that your interest in bringing forward amendments, which I have included in the list as well.
Okay.
So Councillor Schneider has amendments for clauses 1 and 2, which have been noted in green with his name beside them.
Okay.
Just doing it quickly.
Yeah, I have a list of who brought them forward, so I was going to do it that way, but maybe you can help me with, oh, it looks like you've got people's names next to most of them.
So number 5 with Councillor Davies' amendment, noting periodically in 5B. Councillor Johnson, this was the amendment you had raised earlier through email related to clause number 7.
Oh, hang on.
Oh, apologies.
I'm wondering if maybe we can finish our comments and then take a short 5-minute recess and sort this out and then come back and deal with the amendments?
Okay.
That sounds
Is
good.
that?
Sure,
Okay.
and I will, maybe just before I make my comments, I'm just going to ask if, I mean, generally speaking, are there any concerns here from a staff perspective in terms of the work that's been done on the report and the proposed amendments?
Oh, Councillor
Through the,
Castanet?
through the chair, no, I don't believe there's anything that concerns staff.
Okay. So, having said that, then, Madam Chair, first of all, I just want to reiterate my comments earlier on, thanking staff for all the work that went into this. And I too want to thank the decades of neighborhood associations and volunteers who have worked with us as a city to deliver programs at our community centers. As a city, we're very fortunate to have the network of community centers that we do, and part of the reason we're able to do that, quite frankly, is because of decisions that were made many decades ago, for example, to keep our gas utility, which has allowed profits to be reinvested in the community in things like these centers that serve our community. We've also been fortunate, as has been noted by several of my colleagues, that the volunteers that have been an integral part of that have been an important part of those centers. But it's also important to remember that it has not just been those volunteers. In fact, there are both volunteers and staff from many not-for-profit organizations in the community who have also been an integral part of ensuring that we deliver good quality services to the residents of our community. But as has been noted, times have changed, the community is growing, the community is changing, the community is much more diverse, the needs of the community are changing, and we're seeing that we're, not necessarily utilizing our facilities to their fullest extent possible in all instances, and secondly, we're not necessarily meeting the needs of all of our residents in an equitable manner throughout the city. And so I think the recommendations that are before us are solid. Without a doubt, any time you make changes, there will be lessons learned, and so I'm glad that the review, within the first number of years, is part of the conversation that we're looking at. I also think that it's important to remember that yes, at times there is going to be some tweaking that needs to happen, particularly when it comes to scheduling, if we're committed to ensuring that we meet the needs of all of our residents and not only certain groups. And that's a balancing act that often happens, but I think through all of our resources and potentially with partnerships with the school board, in terms of some of those facilities and maybe other community partners, we'll be able to deal with some of the holes that maybe exist in terms of meeting those needs. So I'm pleased with this. I want to thank Council for the thoughtfulness that they've put into this and some of the amendments that have been proposed following their conversation with the neighborhood associations that they work with. And I'm hopeful that once we deal with this and approve it, I'm hoping that we can actually approve it ideally unanimously,
because I think that's both sends a strong message of our appreciation and thanks for where we've been, but also our shared commitment in terms of where we're going around these centers going forward. And so when we get to probably the final motion, because I don't want to do it with all the amendments, maybe when we get to the final motion as amended, we can do it as a recorded vote. Thank you. Only the last one, Chair. I'm not trying to make your life difficult.
Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. Councillor Singh.
Point of clarification, actually, Mayor Benovich raised an important question, staff's satisfaction with all the changes. Not to nitpick Councillor Orduni, but changing to profits rather than revenue, just I'm looking at optics and how it would be received from the public. I mean, it's not their effort to create profits. I think that's just a surplus that arises from the activity. Do we have any concern on that? Net revenue, yeah. Perhaps net revenue. Thank you.
That was nice and simple. Thank you. Councillor Deneau.
Yeah, I've got a few amendments. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Once again, I want to thank staff for bringing this forward. And I think a lot of the outside thought process was we're trying to reinvent the wheel with the NA, with the neighborhood associations. And I don't see that at all. I see it as bringing more balance to the rest of the city, the rest of our community centers, and investing in the community centers, but also investing in the people who will partake in those programs, or our youth, our elderly, people with disabilities, because what they'll give back in the end, I think, is much more valuable than initial investments. Investing in people, you get a greater return. And as I spoke to you last week, Mark and Michael, I think we need to take a look at the underserviced areas, and when we do reach out to the community, we need to provide the literature and pamphlets in other languages other than English. And so if we can take a look at the census and see what the population is around that area, Kingsdale or Chandler Mowat, I think that will help going a long way to engaging more of the community than they might not feel engaged as they go forward. But thanks very much to everybody.
Thanks, Councillor Deneau. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. First I want to acknowledge the work of staff. You guys did a fantastic job on this. And again, to echo the Mayor's comments, I don't think I've ever seen a motion this tweaked before by members of council. It just honestly shows how much we care, and I'm sorry, Chair Johnson, you have to work through this. But again, looking at it, I am very much in support of nearly all of this. I have to say, though, I'm still honestly struggling, at least how it's written, with respect to Councillor Singh's amendment, because it reads to me like the city can write rules or guidelines that would or would not make it satisfactory to the city on how they spend those surpluses. So I can't, in good conscience, support that. Especially because the community associations were not made aware of this, and this is fairly strong language. And respectfully, again, I know this issue really only affects the top 2 or 3 probably community associations, but and I know that there is a surplus based on using a city facility, but at the same time, as has been noted several times, there are volunteers that spend hours and hours and hours of time. And I don't doubt that for some of them, generating a surplus that they hope to have considerable say in reinvesting in the community is part of their motivation. So I am loath to touch upon that now. In terms of transparency, for the first time ever, we're asking that they publish all of their revenues and how they expect to reinvest this. That's a huge step. And I think we need to go one step at a time. Certainly do I agree that there are ways that things could be invested inappropriately, for sure, but that will come via their established reinvestment policy that the city sees. So all out of the way, I'm going to support all of this. Madam Chair, I would ask that we vote on the clause. I guess we'll be voting on it separately, Councillor Singh's clause with respect to the amendment for the satisfaction of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Chapman.
Can I just ask that we vote on 1 and 2 separately as well until we get a report back next week?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. I want to thank staff again for all their hard work on this report. I want to touch on what Councillor Davey commented on and Councillor Singh's amendment. Could you explain it to me again? I'm sorry for this. Councillor Singh, your amendment? Just so I have a clear understanding.
Yeah, no, I don't have a problem with that. And I think we have to take some effort and confidence in our staff to develop a kind of the policy and procedure of how that accountability of 10 would be. Beyond what Councillor Davey has said, it's a step in the right direction that they're making it public as to what they're intending on doing with their large reserves, or whichever association has more than 20,000 other. I think that doesn't go far enough. I think there needs to be a greater level of accountability of how they're going to invest, and there needs to be some agreement with wider, I guess, stakeholders in the community, and the City of Kitchener can help facilitate that. What I heard from Mr. May is that staff would endeavor to create a balanced approach of how that engagement would take place. Again, I would look to staff and seeing if they want to, they recommend a different wordage, or they're understanding the intent of the motion, and they would be bringing back, I guess, at a later time, what that wordage or how the policy framework would be. So essentially, how would staff would work to find consensus with the association? Really, that's where I'm hearing some concerns from other members of council, that we don't want to create a conflict with the associations. Mm-hmm. How would staff help to build consensus as to how those monies need to be reinvested in the community?
Thanks, Councillor Singh. Mr. May?
So through you, Madam Chair, as I noted, this would come forward as part of a fully amended policy later this year. Staff would likely engage with the neighborhood association most affected by this clause. What I've learned over time, and this is in no way a criticism of anyone, is that it's highly unlikely that we will gain a consensus amongst that group and city staff on this issue. And so it would come forward based on staff's recommendation. Neighborhood associations would likely appear to provide their perspective, and then council can make the decision.
Okay. Can I comment? Thank you. And thanks for clarifying and explaining it to me, Councillor Singh. I agree with this, because I think as community centers, it's like you're reporting to a board of directors, and the city is like a board of directors. So you are accountable for what you spend. So any nonprofit organization can't just say, we've got lots of money, we're just going to keep it. You have to explain how you're going to spend it. So I will support Councillor Singh's amendment. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Davey.
Sorry, just a point of clarification. Councillor Singh's amendment isn't making it public. It already, part of this motion, or this new recommendation, is they have to publish their excess revenues, and they have to publish how they're going to reinvest it. Councillor Singh's motion is that the city has to be satisfactory to the city how they decide to spend it. So they would make it public what they're doing, but Councillor Singh's motion is that the city has a say on what they do with it.
Yes.
Sorry, I understand there may be some differences of opinion on this issue, and that's fine. At the end of the day, we'll have to deal with that around the horseshoe. I guess my suggestion would be, because this is also the first that we're bringing something this significant to this discussion today. I'm wondering if we could actually refer that amendment to next week, so that there can be some more discussion potentially with staff and the affected associations. And so I'd be prepared to actually move referral on it to next week, so we can deal with the rest of the stuff and not get stuck on this tonight or this afternoon, becoming tonight.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. May?
Through you, Madam Chair, staff do not have the capacity to meet with all of the affected neighborhood associations between now and council on Monday. What I can assure you is that there will be a number of neighborhood associations that will not be happy with this amendment. If you think it's the right thing to do, then you should vote for it. But I don't need to hold meetings with neighborhood associations to tell you that.
Thank you, Mr. May. Okay, well, we've come to the end of our list of speakers. I'm going to propose a 5-minute recess to confer with the clerk, and then we'll come back and go through the amendments. Okay, thank you. Okay, council, if I can get you to return to your seats, please.
We're going to start with me.
Still 2 people. Still have 2 people.
Through the chair, for some simplicity, there are several clauses in the staff recommendation that have not been amended by council. So it'd be advantageous to go ahead and deal with those clauses first, and I can scroll through them quickly just as I mention the numbers to provide some assistance. So if council is willing to deal with clauses 4, 6, 8, 9, 11, and 12, they can be voted on if it's council's will, because they have not yet been amended, and it seems to be of the consensus of council. So if you'd like to vote on those first, we can deal with them immediately.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, do I have a mover then from council for clauses 4, 6, 8, 9, 11, and 12? Councillor Ioannidis, do I have a seconder? Councillor Obadani?
You already have a mover for the entire recommendation. It was Councillor Singh.
I'm sorry?
You already have a mover for the recommendation. It was Councillor Singh. So we just need to vote on them.
But that we're going to vote on those separately.
Yes.
So, would anyone like a recorded vote? Okay, all right. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried.
Okay. It's my understanding that Councillor Chapman potentially would like to defer clauses 1 and 2. If a deferral motion is being brought forward, now would be the time to do so.
That was 1 and 2?
Clauses 1 and 2.
Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Chapman, do I have a seconder for that deferral?
Can we understand why, so that everyone is aware of why it's being deferred?
Okay.
Yes.
Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, I'd be happy to explain why. So I've asked staff to look at how we could change the wording of both 1 and 2 to include neighborhood associations that do not have community centers, so that any neighborhood association without a community center could also have access to the leisure access fee assistance program, and also the, what's it called? Yeah, so the support worker, the inclusion support worker program. No, it's in 2, isn't it? Okay, so then 3. Well, it's also in 2, isn't it? Yeah, so no, in 2. So that they wouldn't just have to be programs run out of city-owned community centers, but that a neighborhood association providing programs not in a community center, say in a school or a church, that they would also qualify for those supports. Staff has indicated that they will get back to us before council to tell us how this could be done.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Chapman. Was that 1, 2, and 3, or just 1 and 2?
Well, yeah, I guess it should be 3 as well. So 1, 2, and 3.
Sorry. Go ahead, Mayor.
But staff have indicated that they're going to bring this back for next week anyway. So I don't think I'm sensing that your motion is not disagreeing with doing this for community centers. It's actually about expanding it. So I think we could still deal with this. Staff have the direction to bring it back, and then if there's an amendment required, we can deal with that next week.
As long as it doesn't get lost.
I'm sure between now and next Monday, staff will make sure it doesn't get lost.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're not dealing with those now. Okay, thank you.
So it's also my understanding that all of the amendments, save and except for the amendment in clause 10, can be dealt with simultaneously. It seems it's consensus of council. So if the balance of the amendments, save and except for clause 10, can be voted and carried together, if it's council's will. So save and except for 10 is the only one.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Do I have a mover for everything except for clause 10? They've all been moved. Okay.
Through the chair, I just wanted to clarify, there was an additional clause after speaking with Michael May that 13 and 14 have been just separated out to provide additional clarity. So prior to voting, I just wanted to draw your attention to them. So 13 and 14 were one clause previously, and now they are two. So I just wanted to draw your attention to them before you vote. So if you're okay with the amendments, as on the screen, they can be voted on all except for 10.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote on all the amendments other than number 10 as they appear on the screen. All in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. And then we'll move on to clause number 10. Councillor Singh.
Madam Chair, if you may allow, I just have a quick question of staff. And I want to start off with saying I think Mayor Voinovich said something very poignant, that I think it would look very well if there is unanimous support from this council of whatever changes we're making. And I think if you're asking consensus building from the community groups, I think we have to show consensus amongst council and lead by example. So I know that, to my understanding, Mr. May, that whatever comes out arising from the committee and the council with approval, that the I guess policy framework would be adopted and brought back or completed by the end of this year. Is that correct?
Yes.
So understanding that overall there is agreement that there needs to be a greater accountability and figuring out how we can encourage associations to reinvest into their communities, could we look to staff and see that you can try to build that framework of what I was saying and what Councillor Davey is saying, and take consultation from the associations as well as part of the overall policy coming back at the end of the year?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I think in the staff report that comes back, we could address this issue head on, having spoken to neighborhood associations and done some greater thinking on the issue.
And that would give you more time as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's just do it that way, understanding that staff are confirming that that work would carry on as part of the overall policy.
That's perfect, Councillor Singh. Thank you. Councillor Michaud. Okay, Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. On this, I just want to be sure that what we're attempting to do here with staff and the neighborhood associations is like set parameters, not on a piece-by-piece approval. If they want to, like, we can help and work together determining on what they can invest in, but not that if they have a specific project, as long as it falls within those parameters, it doesn't need to be approved by city staff.
Mr. May?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think at least now, without having the benefit of discussions with NAs and discussion with other staff, yes, I do think what we could set out are a set of parameters or guiding principles that we would like to see in terms of the use of those funds within these policies.
Okay, great. Thank you. Madam Chair?
You just need to vote on the clause 10 as amended if council is amenable to that.
Okay,
That would be
thank
the
you.
last one.
Okay, we're voting on clause 10 as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Okay, and now we'll vote on the motion as amended. Recorded vote. And that passed unanimously. Thank you. We have no information items. Do I have a motion for adjournment? Thank you. All those in favor, and thank you.